So I asked David Auden, should I have overhead slides? And he said, no, just shoot from the hip. And in some ways it's very wise, because many of the remarks I would have made, Shahid, about insurance, you've already made for me. And I appreciate it greatly. What I want to do are really 3 or 4 things. One is to talk about the origins of these new, quote, shallow loss increased safety net programs that are presented as essential for the survival of the US farming system. That, of course, is complete balderdash. It's just nonsense. As actually the senior economist at the Farm Bureau admitted in a public setting. The bottom line is the following. In 2009, led by the corn growers and by some other lobbies, the farm lobbies jointly said, we think we're going to lose our direct payments program and $4.9 billion a year, or at least a large part of that. Strategically, how can we present an argument to claw back most of that $4.9 billion in other forms of subsidy? It was explicitly the case that none of the lobbies particularly cared about WTO obligations. None of the lobbies particularly cared about other sectors of the economy that might be adversely affected by a reduced ability of the US to negotiate for market access in other areas. Their only question was, how much of this money can we keep? And another fundamental thing to understand is that we're not talking about poor US farmers here, we're talking about rich US farmers. 80% of these subsidies go to farmers with net worths in excess of $2 million, and their farm households are receiving more than double the median income of a US person. So this is not subsidies for the poor, this is subsidies for the rich. So the mantra that was developed, and I sat in conversations where this was explicitly discussed, was let's come up with a story that we're going to move from getting subsidies that come when we don't need them, that's direct payments, which were definitely social welfare checks, as described in numerous Wall Street Journal and New York Times articles, into giving us help when we need it most. Well, what would that be? Oh, well, when we have a reduction in revenue, we'll need help. For example, the original proposal for this, what is ARC, was that payments should kick in when per acre revenues, not per farm, but per acre revenues, declined by more than 10% from their recent 4, 5, or 2-year averages, depending on the farm proposal. The other proposal came out of the dairy industry. Let's have a margin protection program to protect our margins. So if corn prices go up, we get payments, and if milk prices go down, we get payments. These proposals were explicitly developed in 2009. They were not developed by the committees. They were developed in Congress. They were developed by the farmers. And then the argument was, and Bruce Babcock has a paper that will come out in Choices within a couple of months, that ties this back to Gary Becker's insights, that policies are developed by lobbying groups that appear to be the least offensive ways of acquiring the most monies. And essentially that was the story, and they were very successful in making the case. So now we have an expanded insurance program, very little change in the underlying insurance program, multiple peril yield losses tied to specific farm performance. Those programs are still around. They'll be around subsidized at an average rate of about 62 to 63% of the actuarially fair premium, and more like 70% of the total cost of the insurance programs. And by the way, you need subsidies of at least 40% of the actuarially fair premium to get more than half of your farmers buying these products. And those products have to be tied to the individual farm. The area yield programs don't work very well because they don't allow for moral hazard behavior, because of imperfect correlation between indemnity payments and actual losses on the farm, something that Mario Miranda very wisely called basis risk in his seminal 1981 paper on the issue. So if we look at what's happened, the farmers have been very successful in getting these programs into the Act, in the House and in the Senate. They are fortunate, however, in having a new farm bill at all. The only reason why they have a new farm bill with these new programs is because of Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, who shut down the federal government, which led Republican leadership in the House that, in fairness to that leadership, thought most of these farm subsidy programs were pretty terrible, to fold on allowing passage of a farm bill. If you put the hot money down on a new farm bill in September of 2013, the bill would have been an extension of existing law with some reallocation of funds to cover livestock disaster programs. That was the most likely outcome. After the shutdown, the government, Senator Cruz managed to persuade the Republican Party leadership that they had to pass some act. Their choice was tax reform, immigration reform, or a relatively, in total federal budget program, a farm bill. Guess which one they went to? They went to a farm bill. So we have a highly, what relative to previously existed, a potentially very expensive farm bill. David's numbers are fascinating because they show spending of around about $5 billion this year on corn alone. So you could roughly double that to account for wheat and for soybeans and for other products whose prices are fairly closely linked to the corn market through the animal feed market. So we're looking at for corn alone, all of the subsidies this year that were lost in the direct payments program for all commodities will come back to the farmers just who raise corn, and then there'll be additional subsidies. If we put that in an international context, that's highly problematic, short-term and long-term, in terms of the WTO. The issue, as David has pointed out and Carl has very aptly pointed out, is not aggregate measures of support violations. The real issue is going to be how many individual cases on price suppression are we going to see under the subsidies and countervailing measures component of the trade agreement. And that's an open issue. The programs that David talked about apply to 16 different commodities or thereabouts, both small acreage and large acreage crops. So chickpeas matters, certainly matters to India. Taking a broader perspective, the points that Shahid made about what sort of example are we providing in terms of farm policy out of the US for other countries? Well, the examples are pretty not very satisfactory. I want to come back to one point, and I've got about 10 seconds to make this point, and I realize that. I want to come back to one point that Shahid made that is a very important point in relation to agricultural insurance. I've sat in meetings in Peru with multiple different countries sitting there. Everyone's saying we need crop insurance. And all we need to make it work is, oh, well, that would be the 60% subsidy rate that they have in the US. And essentially that is, as Brian Wright has said, going to be necessary throughout the world for crop insurance. So it is the case you can get anybody to buy crop insurance, any farmer, even in a developing country, if you subsidize the product sufficiently, preferably at 100% for many people. The right question to ask, which too many analysts in the World Bank and in IFPRI and around the country in the US have failed to ask, however, is not can we make crop insurance work, say as an incentive for smallholder farmers to adopt new technologies, new seeds, new varieties. The right question is that the most efficient use of funds, which is exactly the issue that Shahid raised. Recent research that was done out of EPTD suggests that just giving farmers money is more likely to get them to adopt conservation techniques than offering them essentially a very attractive insurance product. Why? For a whole variety of reasons. But that research is asking the right sort of question. And with apologies, just because I happen to be one of the researchers in that project doesn't mean to say that I know everything. But the right question is always, what is the optimal policy to achieve the goal? What is the cost-efficient policy, if you like, to achieve the goal? And almost surely the overwhelming evidence is that crop insurance is rarely that right tool. Thank you.